Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, I want to correct a major injustice. And, since I've been talking about the God-made goofball sector that follows Bruce Lee, I've got a lot of comments from people who've never read any books. They haven't read the Matthew Polly book, which is a very fair discussion of him and who he was as a person. Yet he overlooked a lot of his negative traits by didn't put it in the book, and maybe he didn't even run into it, which I find interesting of, how honest is anybody with you? He did a lot of research on Bruce Lee, but didn't overturn the fact that he was a massive drug user, not a very moral person, cheated on his wife, spent most of his time cha-chan and not learning English, but he spent hours in actual martial arts, which I don't believe either, and certainly wasn't very spiritual or meditative, even though some people said that he would meditate instead of practice. I don't believe any of that in terms of what's going on. He certainly was a fantastic martial artist. He knew all the technicalities, and he knew how to make it look good. From there, we just don't know. He died too young to prove himself as an actor or to make any real decent movies instead of the Hong Kong garbage he put together. And, it's so sad that this guy is still remembered at the level he is 50 years later, while we have masters right here and right now that are ignored. Now, probably the greatest martial arts of all time and the creator of mixed martial arts is, and who's still alive, is Sho Kashugi. Now, maybe that rings a bell with you. Probably not, since this guy has been around for a long time, made some of the greatest martial arts movies of all time, but there really were only a trilogy of them. I think there were only 3 or 4 of these ninja movies that came out in the middle to late 80s, produced at very low costs by Cannon Productions, which was known for that. If it wasn't for Cannon Productions, we wouldn't have all of the great action films, the Chuck Norris films, the Von Damme films. We go on and on of what Cannon Productions did, and as soon as they closed down, everything disappeared. The public doesn't support martial arts films at all, and never really has. There's no martial arts TV shows on television, except at this particular time of the recording here, Karate Kid has been on for 2-3 years and may get a longer run. I'm not sure, but it's more of a soap opera than a martial arts. And there's certainly not very much philosophy in it, since the main character in Karate Kid was the wise old Japanese guy, which doesn't exist in the new series. It is a good series. I do enjoy it, and the fight scenes are surprisingly good. They look good, and they're interesting, done by non-martial artists. That's the only show that's made it now since Kung Fu, who made it 3 years ago in 1971 or something. I'm not sure the exact year, but we're talking about 50 years ago. There was a TV show on the air that was successful, was 50 years ago. There was a couple other ones that came on, and they were thrown in the trash in less than one season. Most of them were canceled mid-season. I do forget there was Martial Law that ran for 3 years. With Sam Hung, whatever his name is, Sammy Hung. Great show, fun, good fight scenes. So I guess there's 3 that have made it, maybe 1 or 2 other. Other ones have tried to, and they all failed, including a show called The Master that came after Kung Fu, with Sho in it. He played the bad guy and so forth, but it didn't make it. It only made it 12 episodes. Van Cleve starred in it. Sho was in it. Throw it in the trash. That's how much interest there was in martial arts in general. So nobody cared. Nobody really even gives martial art much of a credit until recently. But the really injustice that goes on is to give Bruce Lee credit for much of anything. Now, certainly, he did do his thing. He went against the establishment, mostly because the establishment was going against him. And certainly looked cool. I'm not sure there was much past that. We can't give him much credit. He died too young. We'd have to see what real movies he would have made after the last one, which was produced by Americans in China, which was a higher quality film. And we're starting to get there. Would they have made, I'm sure they would have made better films, and I think they all would have failed. Even when his scripted philosophical movie, what was it, The Circle of Iron or something, with Carradine and a few other people teaching some Zen values in a very primitive way, but was a good movie, I like it, that failed. Didn't get an audience. Even to this day, it's not popular. These things are not selling on DVDs to much of anything. People barely even know about them. These are important films that people don't care about. We're talking about martial arts people. So here we go again. We just had a great martial art film come out in 2009 called Ninja Assassins, done by the top producers in Hollywood, Joel Silver and the Kowalski brothers who did Matrix. So they produced this. They made a very slick, very well done film with a fair budget of that time of $40 million. Got Warner's Brothers to distribute it, and it made $61 million. So pretty sad. So all them martial arties heads, all you knee-bending, bend-over worshippers of Bruce Lee, certainly don't support anybody, not to mention the fact that most likely Bruce Lee was murdered in one way or another. Or he overdosed on drugs, or what I think it's a little bit of both. But he certainly was in trouble with the triads. And that's enough. But you'll never look into that. He just was the perfect guy who all he did was dance, dance, dance. Take drugs, drugs, drugs. Screw around, round, round, round. All the time. So he wasn't in temples. He wasn't seeking the higher path. He wasn't even practicing higher martial arts. After all, he knew everything by then. And what he basically did was take drugs and screw around. I don't see him helping anybody or setting up places or big schools in the United States or doing much of anything. All of this stuff, certainly. But, of course, he was too young. We really don't know anything about it, but he did seem to have a serious drug problem. I don't know if it's a problem. He enjoyed taking drugs and did at high levels and got all sorts of physical problems from that and died from something that a lot of cocaine addicts die from. But, there's a lot of cocaine addicts out there, and a lot of them are still alive. People guzzled that stuff. So I don't know the full story of that, but the whole thing that goes with him is that he's far from this perfect person. But I don't want to discredit his abilities, how he did things, his looking at things. But he wanted to be the best. But he also was a fad thing. He went on every fad diet. Anything that was a fad, he would get into. I think he had a mink coat. There's a lot of things that were very, very immature and low level about him. But let's move on to away from him to Sho here. Now, Sho is a very interesting man. He's still alive today. He's 73 years old, and it's a shame that nobody talks about him. Yet they endlessly talk about this guy, and there are books on him. Where's the books on Sho? He's 73. Where are you, Matthew Polly? Go write on the best, the greatest martial arts of all time. Now, I'm not sure why nobody pays attention to him. There's a problem when we come into weapon use in martial arts as well. People can't carry swords, so they don't want to see those kind of action fights, which are very dominated in Japanese films because it's part of their culture. It's all about the sword in Japan and not about the fist, even though there's plenty of martial arts. Let's not forget that ninjutsu has a lot of physical things to it. Aikido, all of these things. Karate. By the way, all of those Sho was a master of. So he trained in Shindo Ryu, karate, kendo, judo, Lido, never heard of, Kobudo, Aikido, ninjutsu. A former All Japan karate champion. So you can't say that he was just a movie star. And he did this at a very young age. So he did all those and more. That's just a little that's listed in Stupidopedia, which always gives you bad information. But it's a quick reference. He also studied, particularly when he came to California, all other martial arts. Pretty much anything that was available, including Kwai-Kon-Do, which he was a black belt master in, and many other systems that he trained in. Some, including many Chinese systems. Now, it doesn't state that he trained in Kung Fu. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I was channeling Bruce Lee there. Okay. Ingan Kwang, Korean Taekwondo. I think I mentioned the Shiro Ru and Sho Kashugi. We just don't. No, I can't. Don't get my pronunciations there. Being dyslexic, so I have a problem with that. And what's interesting is had kind of a similar background to Bruce Lee. His father and mother. I'm sorry. His he is the father of two children that both are. His son is involved in martial arts as well, and has done a few things. But it's almost like they're blocking him out. So if you think of all that karate stuff, well, you're not out there supporting these people and making sure they get films. You're not going out and going to these films. This great ninja assassin movie tanked, which had the greatest martial artists of all time. The MMA founder is Sho. He learned all these things. He started this in 1969, but you didn't care. And everybody wants to give credit just to Lee. So I don't want to sound too disrespectful to Lee. The point is he certainly did certain things, but I don't think he's pushed ahead and over-glorified of someone that really didn't do much. He didn't spend a lot of time trying to set up karate. He wanted to be a movie star, and he did everything he could to be this big-shot, arrogant movie star. Why is Sho still here? Because he didn't take that path. He was smart enough to know that this is a limited area, that there's very little support, and he's not going to find that as a way of making big money. But did that stop him? No. He took the path of the turtle other than the hare. So the bottom line is Bruce Lee was really the hare running at super speeds, burning himself out while he moved around and still is working to this day. He moved to the United States, as I said, in 1969, and was got a degree from a top university, showing that he was smart as well, if you consider that smart. But and he did this. He moved to Los Angeles at the age of 19, and he earned a bachelor's degree in economics from San Diego State University. At the same time, he consistently improved his martial arts skills while learning a wide variety of styles, and taught these styles in his schools, by the way. He has two kids that follow along, as I've said. In Japan, he also ran an internationally organized group of martial artists, acting schools known as Sho Kashugi, known as the Sho Kashugi Institute. So he tried to do something. He knew that he himself couldn't do it, but instead of being egotistical and going out there and zapping himself on drug after drug and dancing the cha-cha and watching soap operas, of course, we don't know. Maybe he was a soap opera fan, who knows? I'm sure he did silly things. Everybody should do little silly things, but there should be something to it. But I mean, and he currently resides in Los Angeles at 73. Unfortunately, he has recently, in 2009, he got a divorce from his wife that he was married to since 1973. But he's not been linked with all. Of course, we don't know because nobody follows them all that much. But he had a long marriage. He had two children. Nobody seems to be in prison or problems. His son, I believe, won the that game show, Ninja, whatever, I can't remember, American Ninja Warrior, I guess it was Japanese Ninja Warrior. And has tried to follow in his father's footsteps to a degree. Again, there's no support for anybody. As I said, there may be a problem because Sho's most of his style has to do with swords, which certainly looks good. But if you're getting into the actual fisticuffy type stuff, there isn't as much of that. So there may be a problem there. But certainly this is a master. I'm not sure if he's written any great amount of books or other things. It's hard to figure out what else he did. But the point is he learned every single martial arts that he could. And by the way, so has everybody else. Chuck Norris came up with his own style of Taekwondo. So it's his system. Every martial artist that I know did that. The famous and probably the best fighter on the planet ever was Joe Louis, not the boxer, the actual martial artist, who was blackballed because he was a little bit too obnoxious to producers, apparently, when he demanded proper food on a set, and nobody liked that, and they blackballed him. He went around and learned every possible system he could. And again, this is at the same time, actually, most of it was pre-Bruce Lee. So when he was in the military, and again, he was a Marine who learned to kill people and then learned martial arts and then learned different types of martial arts as well. So he did it. What is it? Akins of today? I can't remember. Scott Akins. If you look at his bio, he's trained in all these different systems. So everybody's trained in multi-systems now. Now, apparently in the 60s, this wasn't so accepted. Yet everybody seemed to have done it. These are all guys that learned this stuff in the 60s and 70s when Bruce Lee is kind of taking credit for the only one doing it. It's just wrong. Secondly, there's a great injustice of this guy who's still alive, who is ignored, who isn't given very many parts, and it appears that his English ain't that great, even though he's been here since he was 19. I don't know. I haven't... It's hard with these ninja movies. They're very Japanese, and there isn't all that much speaking in them. But the point is, this guy is ignored. He's been mistreated. He's not recognized, as he said, but he was smart. He also went out and made his way. He made sure he kept his fingers in Japan, where they recognized him and where he could get schools going and where he could write literature, where he was recognized at a higher level. Smart, but he never really lived there after 19. He spent all his time in Hollywood trying to get a greater living. And apparently was able to do that as the tortoise who went out there and actually slowly moved ahead, making money where he could instead of trying to be this big-time star. And I guess there's... ninja stars in Japan. I don't know. Not much comes out of there except video games. There certainly is lots of martial arts in China, but the Chinese and the Japanese have a long history of conflict. The Japanese have killed over 20 million Chinese just in World War II, and of course the Japanese have been murdering millions of people in Asia for over 1,000 years. So I'm not sure that there's a mix there. I don't think he could go to Hong Kong and be taken seriously because they would be a great prejudice against him being Japanese, and rightfully so, by the way. So nothing was done there. And of course, there really isn't any Asian stars in America, period. And this is just the way it is. It's the fact that the people producing movies it's very hard to get into Hollywood, period, but only certain groups of people make it anyway. And it's hard to say whom or what they are, but certainly we don't have any major Asian people starring in TV series or anything else, even though they're the highest paid people in the United States, averaging $90,000 a year as a culture. So it's hard to say whether there's been racist against or not there. You got to remember, if you try and put an Asian on white TV in the 1970s in a country that then was pretty much 100% or let's say at least 80% white, people just didn't watch it. It's amazing how we don't have a lot of TV that has Latins in it or Mexicans. Yet 50% of the population is Mexican, but they're not on network TV. They're not even on cable TVs, and you have to wonder about this. So there's very few people of Latin background that are anywhere. Again, this is kind of a mystery. Do they watch their own shows? I don't know. Every time I went into a Mexican establishment in California, they had Channel 12 on, the Mexican station. They only watched their own stations. And that's because other stations don't offer it, or because of their own personal prejudices, I'm not sure. But let's get back to Sho. This is an extremely accomplished, perfect movie type person, but nobody goes to martial arts movies. They're never successful. There's very few television shows. In the last 50 years, there's been 3 that were successful, and those only lasted 3 years, other than now Karate Kid, which may break the mold, going into 4 years. Woo! So, which has no Orientals in it and has no mystical Oriental person in it. Is that why it's successful? Well, that's what the television audience is watching, apparently. And now that we have cable TV and Netflix, we can't blame networks, which have to cater to the masses. They're not catering to anybody. There was one martial arts show that was actually pretty mystical and good on Netflix, was never only made 12 episodes or never came back. Now, I don't know if the ratings were bad, but again, usually they don't do stuff because the ratings is bad, and that means the fact that they're not going to put more money into that. Where are you, martial artists? You watching Happy Days and the Kardashians? So, maybe that's because the Kardashians' bottom represents a punching bag. So the whole idea is that all these things can be looked at in this kind of a fashion. But it's really a shame that this guy, who's now at the end of his life at 73, not that he's going to die soon, but I'm not sure how physically able he is to do much stuff from this point on. But certainly there is no interest, and there's no interest whatsoever from martial artists that do absolutely nothing. They support nothing. They do nothing. Chuck Norris had to go on TV and play a cowboy cop to get a TV show going. Nobody makes any movies now except Van Damme, who makes a couple of movies a year at the momentous budget of $6 million. No one else does anything. Period. Seagal makes an occasional movie, which of course has to have at least 2 strip clubs in it. But nobody really follows him, and nobody really cared. Most people laugh at Seagal and think he's a bozo, which he is to a degree. But I disagree. I think this guy is a deadly killer, if you want it to be. And, of course, his latest movies are pretty bad. But any action movie I watch, because it's just something new and different. Of course, we know Seagal can't move above the waist. He's just 1,000 pounds. But the point is that regardless of that, maybe if he had more support at the box office, he wouldn't make it. And again, he's making these $6 million movies, which is about the catering budget. And we go on and on. Who else is out there? Scott Akins came on the scene. He's made, again, low-budget stuff. None of them are a big hit. You can't take these guys and put them in Hollywood movies and put them on Hollywood Boulevard. Nobody goes and sees them. And there's a whole bunch of it. There was a guy named Gruen, a French guy, who was an actual, I used to watch his movies, which have disappeared. He's an actual French commando. Good movies, and this guy obviously knows how to fight. And, I do like people who have been in the military because, they've been trained to kill people. So there's a realism there. Gruen, Joe Louis, these are guys in the military. Even Chuck Norris was a military police guy in Korea. So these people have been trained to use deadly force. And Gruen, I think, saw action. I don't think anybody else did. I'm not sure if Joe Louis ever made it to Vietnam. But he was a Marine. We can't say that they're sitting around twiddling their thumbs. So the whole idea is that this is the reality of what's out there. But nobody goes to any of their films. There is no successful or big budget martial arts films out there. There's a few action films, and you're not going to see a martial arts film unless it has lots of guns in it. So Van Damme continues to make some fairly good films. His Pound of Flesh new film is one of the oddest martial arts kind of action films I've ever seen. I highly recommend it. Check that out. Ninja Assassins, what a fantastic film that is. Very stylishly done by some of the best producers in Hollywood of The Matrix and other great films that Joel Silver was involved in, and the Wolworski sisters that are making great produced films. Top quality. 60 million? I mean, it's just unbelievable that there doesn't seem to be any serious interest in these areas. And even those who watch a lot of fantasy films, like Star Wars and other things, and they like their little fake guns and shooting in space, these people don't seem to give any credit to the martial artists. Well, that's another thing. That's not. So this is really weird, strange, and unusual. But, you know, I'm really sick and tired of Sho being totally disregarded, not remembered, and has no following whatsoever. There's nothing on this guy. There's nobody out there making any kind of serious movies with him. There's no comments on him. You know, everything is either attacking people that are common martial artists of today, like Seagal. And you can say whatever you want about him. He's a martial artist. If you're into that, you should be seeing his films. Nobody really talks about Van Damme. A lot of people joke about him. Of course, again, he won a bunch of titles and certainly is a martial art technician of the finest degree. So this guy deserves a lot more credit for what it is. And it goes for all of them. I mean, you know, Chuck Norris is doing cowboy movies. That's the best he can get. So all this stuff is pretty sad. So if you think there, and of course, when you do have somebody, and of course, Chuck Norris is very old now to go, but here, Sho, he's 73. He'll probably live to be in his 90s, usually being Asian and being fit, because they have a better diet, apparently. But he won't be remembered, I think, from this point on. He hasn't done anything since this 2009 film that I can see. So we've already got 10 years of oblivion. It just ain't happening, people. And as a martial artist, you should shut your mouth and start talking about this guy, what he's done, and demand that we have movies and other things come from him instead of going after this dead guy 50 years ago, who the more that we learn about him is more questionable. But certainly he should be honored and talked about, but not at the disrespecting of living legends right now. And the interesting thing about all this is that most martial artists of today, except Lee, are living legends. And while Chuck Norris, unfortunately, is on some right-wing Christian slant, who people now ignore, rightfully so, because of his, you know, very conservative nut job Christian beliefs. Where's the rest of them? Where's anybody doing anything? And why isn't there a demand? Why don't we have movies where these people are successful and we can kind of put their feet to the fire and say, hey, what can you teach us? Why don't you put out stuff that we can learn from? What is your philosophy? I read a few of Norris's early books, and there really is nothing there. He spent all this time in martial arts and in Korea, and he decided that Christianity is the answer to a radical degree. He's a born-again type right-wing Christian, which is really a disgrace to Christianity in general. But what has everybody else done? Nothing. Of course, Van Damme isn't much better. He calls himself a extreme Christian, coming from his Belgian French background, who are all these Christians. So, of course, I guess we've been saved the drama of having to read anything from his pea brain, unfortunately. But no doubt about it, his movies are good, he looks good, and that's all I'm really concerned about. But he's done some little YouTube exercise videos to promote his new films that come out, and that's about all he's done. But at least he's getting some movies out there. But $6 million movies? Come on, people. This is what you, the martial arts public, has produced. No support, no backing, no nothing.